260 people board a plane. Engines roar. The wheels lift off the ground. And then, in less than a minute, everything goes wrong. The aircraft comes down. Buildings collapse. Fire tears through the wreckage. When it's finally over, rescuers comb through the debris looking for survivors. They find one. Just one man, walking out of the crash site on his own 2 feet, with minor injuries, while 260 others never made it home. How does something like that happen? Is it luck? Is it where you're sitting? Is there something these impossible survivors all have in common? Today, we're going to look at 4 of the most haunting plane crash survival stories in modern aviation history, and try to answer that question. But first, this video is for informational and educational purposes only. Nothing here should replace professional guidance. Flying is statistically the safest way to travel, and we'll get to that. But these stories deserve to be told. It's a sweltering day. The temperature is pushing 37 degrees Celsius as Vishwas Kumar Ramesh and his brother make their way to their seats on a Boeing 787 bound for Gatwick Airport in London. Vishwas settles into seat 11A by the window. His brother sits across the aisle. Neither of them has any reason to think this flight will be anything other than ordinary. It isn't. Shortly after takeoff, both engines fail. The aircraft loses altitude rapidly, clips through trees, and slams into a residential compound, one that housed doctors and medical students from a nearby hospital. The nose is slightly pitched upward on impact. The tail section shears off. The fuselage tears through walls and ceilings. The wings break away, and with them, the fuel tanks ignite into a massive fireball. 241 people on board are killed. 19 more die on the ground. Vishwas Kumar walks out alive. When reporters catch up with him at the hospital the next day, he can barely speak. "I can't explain," he says. "Everything happened to my eye. I can't." His brother did not survive. So how did he make it? Investigators believe a combination of factors worked in his favor. His seat was positioned just ahead of the wing and fuel tank section, meaning when the fireball erupted, he wasn't directly in its path. There's also evidence suggesting the fuselage may have fragmented in a way that further separated him from the most catastrophic part of the impact. He escaped through an opening beside him. Whether that was a rupture in the fuselage or a blown-off emergency exit door, investigators aren't entirely sure. He walked away. His brother didn't. Same plane, same row, different sides of the aisle. Now let's go back to 1985. Japan Airlines Flight 123 is fully booked, 524 people heading from Tokyo to Osaka the day before a major national holiday. Families going home. Children excited for the break. Among the passengers is Yumi Ogochi, a flight attendant for Japan Airlines, but today she's off duty, traveling as a regular passenger, sitting in row 56 near the back of the aircraft, flipping through a magazine. Then she hears a loud bang. The oxygen masks drop. The cabin pressure collapses. A large section of the tail fin has torn off mid-flight, the result of a pressure bulkhead that was never properly repaired after a hard landing 7 years earlier. And now, with that critical structure destroyed, the pilots lose control of the aircraft entirely. The plane climbs and descends on its own. It rolls. It yaws. There's nothing the crew can do. For 30 agonizing minutes, the plane remains in the air, completely uncontrollable. Yumi, trained for exactly these moments, gets out of her seat. She helps passengers with oxygen masks and life vests. She demonstrates the brace position. Around her, people are writing farewell notes to their families. When the plane finally strikes a mountain ridge in a remote range in Gunma Prefecture, Yumi is strapped back into her seat, braced. She survives. So do 3 other passengers, all women, all seated in the rear section of the aircraft. 520 people die. Rescue teams don't arrive until 15 hours later because authorities assumed there were no survivors. Experts have since suggested that many more people who initially survived the impact likely died waiting in the cold through the night. All 4 survivors were seated in the rear of the plane. Aviation researchers have noted that the tail section, reinforced by the horizontal stabilizer and the tail fin, tends to be a structurally solid part of the aircraft. A data analysis published by Time magazine found that middle seats in the rear section had among the highest survival rates in crashes studied, though researchers were careful to note that the differences between cabin areas were relatively marginal, and the sample of crashes studied was limited. Alone injured deep in the Amazon, Juliana does what her father always told her: follow the water. She finds a stream, then a river. She drifts downstream, surviving on a small bag of candy she found near the crash site, navigating past caimans and other wildlife. After 11 days alone in the jungle, she's found by a group of workers and brought to safety. She is the only survivor among 92 people on board. How she survived the fall itself remains one of aviation's great mysteries. Juliana has her own theories. Powerful updrafts beneath storm clouds may have slowed her descent. The row of seats she was attached to may have rotated like a propeller, reducing her falling speed. And the dense, layered canopy of the rainforest may have acted as a natural cushion on impact. In this case, where she was sitting on the plane almost certainly had nothing to do with it. The forces at work were far beyond that. The investigation revealed a sequence of compounding failures, outdated airport charts, a distracted air traffic controller, and a cockpit culture in those final minutes that had drifted dangerously away from procedure. In Polhinky's own words, years later, the people that came on board the plane were my responsibility. And if there's anything I can say to the family members, I'm sorry we made that mistake. She survives. So do 3 other passengers, all women, all seated in the rear section of the aircraft. 520 people die. Rescue teams don't arrive until 15 hours later because authorities assumed there were no survivors. Experts have since suggested that many more people who initially survived the impact likely died waiting in the cold through the night. All 4 survivors were seated in the rear of the plane. Aviation researchers have noted that the tail section, reinforced by the horizontal stabilizer and the tail fin, tends to be a structurally solid part of the aircraft. A data analysis published by Time magazine found that middle seats in the rear section had among the highest survival rates in crashes studied, though researchers were careful to note that the differences between cabin areas were relatively marginal, and the sample of crashes studied was limited. So what do these 4 survivors have in common? Honestly, very little. 1 was seated near the front. 3 were near the back. 1 fell from the sky strapped to a row of seats. 1 was the only crew member conscious enough to be found. Their ages, their circumstances, their injuries, all different. Reuters analyzed over 1,400 commercial aviation accidents and found 45 cases with only 1 to 5 survivors. In 20 of those cases, they could identify where survivors were seated. The data shows survivors came from every section of the aircraft. Front, middle, rear. There's no magic seat. What experts consistently point to is this: survival in catastrophic crashes is largely a matter of chance, determined by how the aircraft hits the ground, what part of the fuselage survives intact, where the fire spreads, and how quickly rescue teams arrive. The variables are almost impossible to predict. But here's the thing, and this matters: cases like these are extreme outliers. According to the U.S. National Transportation Safety Board, more than 95% of all passengers involved in plane crashes survive. That includes emergency landings, crash landings, and post-crash fires. An MIT researcher calculated that to statistically die in a plane crash, You'd need to fly every single day for 55,000 years. Modern aircraft are engineered to be fully evacuated within 90 seconds, even with only half the exits functional. Flying is not just safe. It is, mile for mile, the safest form of transportation on the planet, and it gets safer every single year. That said, there are practical things worth knowing. Pay attention to the safety briefing. Even if you've heard it 100 times, count the rows to your nearest emergency exit in a smoke-filled cabin. That number could matter more than your eyes. Familiarize yourself with the brace position. Crash tests have shown it meaningfully reduces the risk of spinal and head injuries. If the aircraft lands, leave immediately and do not stop for hand luggage. People have died in survivable crashes because passengers ahead of them blocked the exits retrieving bags. If there's a water landing, put on your life vest, but don't inflate it until you're outside the aircraft. And maybe wear leather or cotton rather than synthetic fabrics on your next flight. Polyester melts. Cotton doesn't. These stories stay with us. They go viral. They haunt us in ways that a car accident on the evening news doesn't. And maybe that says something about us, about how deeply unnatural it still feels to trust a metal tube hurtling through the sky. But the numbers don't lie. The skies have never been safer. And every single crash, as terrible as each one is, teaches the industry something that makes the next flight a little less likely to end the same way.